Hey guys, welcome back to Sweet Red Poppy. On today's episode, we are sewing the most adorable zipper pouch. Now I'm so excited to share this tutorial with you, but if you're new to sewing, don't be afraid. I am going to walk you through every single step of this project. I have some really great tips and tricks that will help you get through sewing your very first zipper, and I'm going to hold your hand the whole way. So let's go ahead and jump right in. For this tutorial, you'll need fabric. You'll want a color for the main part of your bag, and you'll also want a different color for the lining of your bag. You'll need some pins, a zipper, a rotary or a pair of scissors, an iron, a ruler for measuring, and some fabric tape to close your seam, and a sewing machine. To start out, you'll want to pre-cut your fabric down to the correct size. It really depends on how big or how small you want your sewing pouch to be. This little cardstock template that I cut is 11 by 8 inches. Now, if you want a smaller pouch, you can definitely make it a little bit smaller. Keep in mind the size of your zipper. You will want to make sure that your zipper is big enough to fit with your pouch. I really like using a rotary mat and a rotary because it just makes cutting so much faster. So I'm going to use that. Make sure that if you're cutting, that you're always cutting away from yourself. Once you've cut the outside of your pouch, you want to go ahead and cut another 2 layers of fabric, and that's going to be the lining of your pouch. You can use a different color. I like using a different color because it makes the sewing process a little bit easier, because it's really obvious which one is the lining and which one is the outside fabric. So I'm going to pull down my pattern about 1/2 inch, just to make sure that my lining is a little bit smaller than the outside. And what that does is it just removes some of the bulk that you might have on this project when you're turning your lining back in. Okay, so the inside of my pouch is cut and the outside is cut as well. So I'm going to lay these aside and I'm going to start working on my zipper. For this tutorial, I am using an exposed zipper. I found these on Amazon. You can find them on Etsy as well. And this is a little bit of an easier zipper to sew. If you're brand new to sewing, zippers can be a little bit intimidating, but you're actually going to be just placing this right on top of the fabric, so it's great for beginners. One of the things I like to do is I set my zipper on top of my fabric and kind of make sure that it looks like it's a good fit color-wise. So I'm playing around with this yellow one. I think it brings out some of the yellow in this floral fabric, so I'm going to go ahead and choose that one because I think it's a good match. You'll notice that my zipper is a little bit larger than the pouch, so what I need to do is trim this down a little bit. And you can always trim a zipper down. The most important thing is that you're creating a new stop, which this is the stop. You just need to create one that's a little bit shorter, and you can do that with your sewing machine. So I'm going to lay this out just to get an idea of how big I want it to be. And I like to leave a little bit of a gap between the very edge of the fabric and my zipper. That's just going to remove, again, some of that bulk from your seams when you're turning it right side out. So I'm going to take an old pair of scissors. Now this is important. If you're cutting through a zipper, you don't want to use your best sewing scissors, otherwise they're going to get dull. So use an older pair of scissors that you don't care about, and you're just going to gently cut through that zipper. Now, before you open this or do anything to it, grab your sewing machine and we're going to create a new zipper stop. So I'm going to raise my presser foot, place my zipper right underneath the presser foot, and I'm going to select a zigzag stitch. And then I'm just going to be zigzagging over this zipper, and that's just going to create a new stop. And you're just going to go back and forth just a few times until you've secured that zipper in place. So now we have a new little zipper stop. Lay out the outside pieces of fabric in front of you. You want to make sure that they are right sides facing upwards. And then you're going to place the lining fabric on top, and right sides should be facing each other. So you're sandwiching them together. You're going to be lining up this edge, both sides, and then you want to pin it in place. Now this might seem a little bit backwards, but it's all going to come together. Use some pins just to secure everything in place. Now it's time to sew. Remember to change your stitch back to a normal straight stitch. And place your fabric underneath the presser foot. We're going to be using a 3/8 inch seam allowance on this. And when we start and when we end, we want to make sure to backstitch just to secure those stitches in place. And go ahead and remove those pins as you're sewing so you don't sew over them. Now you're going to do exactly the same thing with your second piece of fabric. Now you want to open up your liner and your outside fabric. I like to face it downward so I can get into the seam. You want to press it towards the lining. One of the most important things when you're sewing is to make sure that you're taking the time to press everything, because that's really going to give you that professional look. So I'm pressing that seam towards the lining, and then I'm going to fold this over and press it again. When we're sewing, a lining should never be seen from the outside. That's why I pressed it towards the lining, because that's just going to hide that fabric. So it's just rolled just a little bit. So you can see how I just have a little bit showing on this side. Now repeat that same process with your other piece of fabric. Now it's time to attach your zipper. If you're brand new to sewing and you're a little bit overwhelmed about sewing a zipper, you can use fabric tack to put this in place, and then you can sew over it, or you can just go ahead and really pin it well and sew right over it. So grab some pins and start pinning. You want to make sure that your fabric is just slightly overlapping this zipper. Now that we're adding the zipper to our pouch, we want to switch out our normal foot for a zipper foot. We're going to be sewing on the right-hand side of the zipper foot. So you're going to slide this zipper right underneath, and you want to line it up. There's a little groove on the right-hand side, and that is where your zipper is going to go right underneath that. And you want to make sure it's lined up perfectly before you begin sewing. And before I start sewing, I'm going to switch out my thread so that it is matching my zipper. As you're sewing your zipper, just go ahead and check every few inches to make sure that you're making it through the zipper and catching your fabric. As you come to the top zipper tab, if it's giving you an issue, you can just hand crank your machine over that little tab. Once you get to your zipper, lift your presser foot and pull it up to the top. You want to make sure that your needle is in the down position so you don't lose your spot. And don't forget to backstitch. Just want to check on the back to make sure that you got all of your fabric, and we made it all the way through, and it looks perfect. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side of fabric. Again, when you're lining this up, make sure that you pull your zipper down just a bit, and then we'll pull it up halfway through. And if you're struggling to keep your zipper in place, you can always grab a glue stick and glue it in place, or you can even use some of this fabric tack to put it in place as well. Now that we're switching to the right-hand side of our fabric, we also need to switch our zipper foot. So it has two different sides. We're going to switch to the left-hand side. Again, we're going to align our zipper right underneath the little groove in our zipper foot. Make sure that everything is lined up. I'm going to put my needle in the down position, lift my presser foot, and pull my zipper all the way to the top. Now it's time to connect your outside fabric and your lining. So you're going to grab the top, pinch it together, and line up your outside and your lining. They're going to be facing right sides together. I'm just going to throw a few pins in here along the way, just to keep everything straight. And you can always use as many pins as you'd like. If you feel more comfortable with more pins, go ahead and add more pins. Now the trickiest part is lining up the zipper seam. So I'm going to open this up a bit and take a peek in here and throw a few pins right inside. Now I'm going to put a pin straight across the middle of the lining fabric, and that's just going to be a visual reminder for me not to sew this part, because we need to leave some part of this open so that we can turn it. You also want to make sure that your zipper is open part of the way. That way you can flip it right side out when we're done sewing. I'm going to start at the part where I want to leave an opening, just so I don't forget about it. And you want to make sure to switch your foot back to the normal foot since we're done sewing the zipper. At this point, if you want to change your thread, you can, just to make it match better. I'm going to leave the thread that I have in, just so that you guys can see exactly where I'm sewing. And I'm just using a 3/8 inch seam allowance on this. Make sure that you're back stitching really well at the beginning and the ending of this, because when you're turning, there's a lot of pressure placed on that seam and we don't want it to unravel. As you come to your zipper, it might be a little bit hard for your machine to get over this big hump. So you can use your crank on the right-hand side of your machine and you can just hand crank it over, or you can just slow down the speed of how fast you're going, because you don't want to break your needle as you go over that zipper. Slow down as you come to that zipper and make sure that everything is lined up. Okay, as you're coming to the end, remember to leave a gap right here and backstitch, just to lock those seams in place. Before we turn this right side out, we want to take care of our corners. And what I like to do is just use a pair of scissors to trim down my corners. And what that's going to do is remove some of the bulk, makes it a little bit of a sharper corner once we turn it right side out, and it just makes it look a little bit more professional. And sometimes I will just trim down my seams a little bit if they're pretty thick. Now I'm going to stick my hand through this hole, and I want to grab onto the inside of my pouch and just pull it through. You want to look for the side where your zipper is open so you can pull everything through. Go ahead and open this up completely. Before I tuck the lining of this into the bag, I want to take care of this opening. You can finish this a few different ways. You could use fabric glue, you could hand sew it, or you could sew it with your machine. I'm going to use my fabric tack just because it's not going to be seen by anyone. And I'm just going to do a little line of glue. And a little goes a long way, you don't need very much. Then I'm going to pinch it in place. I like to finger press it just a little bit. At this point, I'm going to give the entire bag a good pressing. I want to make sure that all of my seams are nice and flat. Now I want to pay extra close attention to the corners of my pouch. You can take one of your pins and gently pull each corner out. Just gently going to stick that into the corner and just pull it out until you have a nice sharp point. And that's really going to give you a nice professional finish. That's one of the things I look at when I see a bag and I want it to look like it was professionally made and not hand sewn, is I'm looking for those nice sharp corners. And it just takes a minute, but it looks so good when you're done. So I'm going to roll this seam between my fingers and really pull it all the way out, and then I'm going to press it. And the same on any of those seams, just roll them out between your fingers and then press. Once you've pressed that, you can go ahead and turn your lining into your bag. I like to poke my corners out while my fingers are in there. Make sure that everything's lined up really nice. If you have any stray threads, go ahead and trim those right now. So I have a few over here I'm going to take care of. And I'm going to give it one final press. Gently go over your zipper. Make sure not to melt your zipper if it's plastic. And here you have your finished pouch. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to Sweet Red Poppy and hit the little like button. You can also turn on notifications if you want to find out every time I share a new crafty video. I will see you next week.